Hello everybody, these notes are on the head and neck anatomy, so you should make sure to watch this video before our next class. So, starting with the skin areas around the outside of the head itself, you have the scalp, which is basically the skin and all the other layers above the bone. It does lots of things, including protecting the skull and protecting against infections so that things can't get in to the brain and the bone from the outside, just like your skin does everywhere else. And you also have hair up there to protect the skin from the sun and anything else that might be in the air. Into the bones. You've got 22 bones technically, but once you are an adult, so like 25, 30 years old, they have all fused together except for the lower jaw, so it's all just one structure, but it's really 22 different bones. The word cranium means the bones that protect the brain itself. In between each of these bones, except for the lower jaw, you have what are called suture joints because they look like it's been stitched together like sutures. They're very firm joints. They are locked in there. They're not going to move once you set them. The only part that does move is the mandible or the lower jawbone, and it's held together just like every other joint by ligaments and muscles and all those things. The skull bones you should know, and I will have pictures for you. But we have frontal, mandible, maxilla, nasal, occipital, orbital, parietal, temporal, and zygomatic. So frontal bone is like your forehead bone. Parietal is up on the top. Occipital is toward the back. Temporal is on the side, if you can remember, like your temples, in that area above your ears. Zygomatic, that's your cheekbones. Maxilla is your top jaw, and mandible is your lower jaw. Here is it from the front. And here you can also see the nasal bone, which is right up at the top of your nose. Most of your nose is cartilage. Again, I will have these pictures for you later. Here's the picture from the bottom. And one thing I did want to point out to you, there's a big hole in the bottom of your skull. It's called the foramen magnum. That big hole is where your brainstem and your spinal cord come out, so your spinal bones would go right up against there. You can see those kind of smoother looking things above the hole. That's where your spine starts to joint up, starts to articulate with your skull. Another bone. This is actually a weird little bone because it's not really attached to anything else. It's called the hyoid bone. It's underneath your neck, and its whole job is to help you move your tongue. In your spine, we know we have 3 sets of vertebrae, and we group them based on where they are in the body. We've already done thoracic and lumbar, but we're going to focus now on the cervical ones, which are in your neck, and you have 7 of them. So, here's a picture for you again. Cervical is the neck, thoracic is where the ribs attach, so the chest area. Lumbar is the lower back, and then the sacrum and coccyx are down by your hips. We're going to look at what a vertebrae looks like now. I'm going to flip back and forth a little bit, so stay with me here. The body of the vertebrae, that's this round, kind of roundish, it's kind of like awkwardly shaped. It's thick, its whole job is to support your weight. It is more anterior in your body. The intervertebral discs are the cartilage pads in between the bones. You can see them there on the right side. Their job is to separate the bones and to give some cushion because you are putting a lot of weight on those bones. Vertebral arch. That is the pointy, archy things on the end there. And it is posterior in each section, so like the cervical section, the vertebral arches are a little different. The thoracic section, they're a little different. The bottom parts, they're a little different, but they're all there, just a little shaped differently. And there's the vertebral foramen, the hole. Foramen is the Latin word for hole or window. So it's the hole in the middle, and that's where the spinal cord passes through. So one more time, we've got the body we've got the foramen, we've got the arch, and we got the disc. All those other words on there are anatomy words and have a lot to do with how the joints come together, but they're there for you to see. For us, if you know those four I haven't read, you're good. In your neck, we have two special vertebrae. The first and second one are pretty important because that's right where your brain is and your skull is, so they have their own names. The atlas is the first one. It's right under the skull. It articulates with the skull. The axis is the second one, and it's really important because it lets your head go from side to side, like the shaking your head no motion. So without these two vertebrae, you would have a very hard time moving your neck. And if an athlete were to injure either of these, it's a really big deal. I mean, breaking any part of your vertebrae is bad all the way down, but the two that are very close to the skull and the brain are the worst to have injured. So now on to the organ parts. The CNS and PNS. CNS is central nervous systems. It's your brain and spinal cord. And there are some nerves in your face that come directly out of the brain, so they're kind of included there. The peripheral nervous system, or PNS, that's all the nerves that come out of the spine and go into your torso and your legs and arms. So from here on out, we're just going to say CNS and PNS. I have a video down there if you're interested in how nerves work. You can check that out. But we've seen this picture before. It's the structure of a neuron. So just to remind us, the dendrites are the projections from the cell body. They're on the left side there. They receive the incoming message to the nerve. The soma is the cell body, and that's where the nucleus and all the other organelles are, and it holds the signal until it builds up enough to be sent along. The axon is the long cell part. It looks kind of like a long tail. It's covered in those little sausage-looking things called myelin. Myelin helps to insulate the signal so it doesn't fly out all over the place. Axon terminals are on the far end where the axon passes the message to the next dendrite or to a muscle. So there we go. You should know, if you don't already, in general, how a nerve works. So what actually is being passed between these nerves when we say the, quote, signal? It's actually chemicals. And those chemicals are called neurotransmitters. So here are a few, there's a lot more, but you can kind of see what they do for the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. It's like acetylcholine. For the CNS, it controls skeletal muscles, and for the PNS, it stimulates muscle contractions. Norepinephrine makes you feel good. Dopamine also makes you feel good. Dopamine is the one that, if you have Parkinson's, that's the one that they have trouble with, is dopamine. Serotonin helps you go to sleep. Histamine helps you wake up. Endorphins help you to not feel as much pain. There's one called Substance P that tells you when you are in pain, and nitric oxide dilates blood vessels. Like I said, there's a lot more out there. These are just some examples of different chemicals that work in your nerves. The meninges. This is one of my favorite anatomy words, meninges. These are membranes in between the central nervous system and the bones. So between the brain and the skull, and between the spinal cord and the spinal bones. The meninges are membranes that help to protect it from the outside. There are several layers. You have the dura mater, which is the outermost one. The arachnoid mater, which is very thin and in the middle, and it kind of looks like a spider web. That's why it's called arachnoid. And the innermost is the pia mater, where you have a lot of blood vessels that go directly to the CNS. So here's some pictures for you. You can see in the picture on the top right there the skull and then the membranes in between the brain. So these are kind of important to protect, but they also have blood vessels and some nerves and other things that can help to bring nutrients to the brain and spinal cord. If you've ever had meningitis, or you've heard of meningitis, or had the vaccine for meningitis, it's a bacterial or viral infection of the meninges. So it causes the meninges to get all swollen, and There's bacteria and viruses in there, so you have this whole immune response happening, and it pushes on the brain or spinal cord, and it can be deadly. So that's why they tell you to get the vaccine, so that you don't die. Also, around your brain and spinal cord is something called cerebrospinal fluid. It's just what you think it would be. It's a liquid. It flows through some openings. You can see in the brain picture there on the bottom, there's some openings throughout the brain. The fluid flows throughout there. It also flows around the top of the brain, around the whole brain stem, down on the spinal cord. It acts as kind of like a liquid cushion, a liquid pillow. It also makes the weight less because there's some holes in there. And it helps to move things. So if you are sending food from your digestive system up there, it can help to send those molecules to different parts of the brain through that fluid. We can also use the cerebrospinal fluid to diagnose some injuries or illnesses, but they take a big old needle and stick it in your spine and take some of the fluid out, so not fun. In the brain, we have white matter versus gray matter. It's based on their color, even though the gray is really just slightly off-white. It's kind of hard to tell the difference. You kind of have to look at a real live brain to be able to see, which none of us are going to do, I hope. White are the fibers and axons, while gray is the nerve cell bodies. They're a little darker because of the nuclei. The white is controlling communications, while the gray controls processing. Most of your brain is white, and 40% of it is gray. Now onto the brain itself. I know these are a little long and I'm going kind of fast, but you've got a lot going on up there, so feel free to pause whenever you need to. You've got 4 major areas in your brain. There's the cerebrum, the diencephalon, the brainstem, and the cerebellum. I have a model in class, 2 models actually, where I labeled the different parts of the brain, so if you want to look at those to help you figure out where all this is, go for it. We're going to start with the cerebrum. This is the top part. When you think of a brain, you're probably thinking of the cerebrum. It actually has 2 sides, 2 hemispheres, and the thing in the middle is called the corpus callosum. This is what makes humans different than a lot of other organisms. All those folds are increasing surface area, so we can fit more brain into a smaller space. So we don't necessarily have larger brains than other species, like elephants have pretty big brains, but we have more complicated brains. We have more brain in a smaller space. Based on some studies where we made people do things and then looked at what part of their brains lit up, we can figure out what part of the cerebrum does what thing. So, the frontal lobe, which in this picture is the yellow part, it takes care of concentration, planning, and problem solving for you. The parietal lobe, it's that purplish reddish color in this picture. It takes care of what your skin feels. It tells you what you're feeling. It also is for speaking and for understanding words. The temporal lobe, and this one is green. It's on the side by your ears, like remember temples. It is interpreting sensory experience, specifically visual and sound patterns, auditory patterns. The occipital lobe is in the back, and this helps you with your vision and recognizing different things. The diencephalon, don't worry about writing all these down because they're not really that terribly important, but this is in the very center of the brain, so here's like a brain if you cut it in half. These are things that really send messages to the rest of your body. So the thalamus sends messages back and forth to the cerebrum. The hypothalamus is involved with the endocrine system. Optic nerve, optic eye, sending messages to the eyes and brain. Pituitary gland, you can thank that one for puberty. It's regulating hormones. Mammillary bodies have some memory, and the pineal gland is also, you can thank that one for puberty too. So, the way this would work, this diencephalon in the middle is sort of like the relay center for the brain. So if you touch something, the nerves in your hand sense that you touch something. They send the message to your spinal cord and then up toward your brain. The parts of the diencephalon go, oh, we're touching something, and they figure out what part of the cerebrum to send it to. Then your cerebrum figures out what you're touching. Is it a good touching thing? Is it a bad touching thing? Should we move our hand away from it? And it sends a message back down to your hand to let you know what to do. So the diencephalon is kind of like the relay system. It takes the stuff from the body and sends out messages to everybody. The brainstem. This is the part of the brain that even if you looked at reptiles or something that you wouldn't think has a very complicated brain, they all have these parts of the brainstem. So sometimes this is called, quote, the reptilian brain, because like every animal has this part, but that doesn't mean we're reptiles. It just means everybody has this part. So the midbrain is the reflex center. Whenever you go to the doctors and get your kneecap hit and your knee jerks, thank midbrain for that. The pons helps to send the signal up to higher areas. The medulla oblongata. You should take a second now and thank your medulla oblongata for everything it does, because it controls your heart, your breathing, your blood pressure, your digestion, all those things you don't have to think about. So if you injure that, you're dead. You're dead really fast. And one other part, the cerebellum. It's toward the back of the brain. It looks a little different. And it's in charge of movement, really, and equilibrium. So where your body is, how your limbs move, how your legs move when they walk, how your arms move, how you maintain posture with your muscles, how your body stays upright and even. That's all the cerebellum. Here's a picture of everybody together. I will get these pictures printed out for you so you have them for your notes. So, the senses that are involved in the head. We have the eyes, obviously. The job of the eyes is to take in light sensations and send it up to the brain, and then your brain can interpret what you are seeing. The way this works in general is you can see the cornea area and the pupil and lens. It takes in the light. It gets shined against the back of the eye. That in the back you have all of the nerves. The nerves take in the signal and send it to your brain and tell you what you are seeing. You also have your sense of smell in your head. So that's what your nose looks like on the inside. It's very similar to other things in that you get molecules that you breathe in, scent molecules. They hit the nerves inside of your nasal cavity, and your nerves inside of your nose send it to your brain, and your brain tells you what you're smelling. It's more of an experience type thing. So like if you smell coffee one time and you know it's coffee, then the next time those molecules hit your nose, your brain automatically go, oh, coffee, I know that one. The ear. The outside of the ear is where a lot of injuries are going to happen, like we'll see when we get there. But there's also a middle ear and an inner ear. So you can see where it says tympanic membrane, that's your eardrum. The sound comes in through your outer ear, goes down the ear canal, hits the eardrum vibrates, kind of like the top of a drum, it vibrates. It moves those little tiny bones, the malleus incus and stapes, those little tiny bones, and send it onto the cochlea. The cochlea then sends it on to the nerves, and the nerves send it to your brain so you know what you're hearing. The cochlea also has tiny hairs in it that help you with balance and equilibrium. Other things going on in the head besides your brain. You've got your mouth in there. And all the things for digestion. All the stuff we've already seen before. That's all in there. We also have the larynx and the pharynx and the throat and the teeth. Teeth we're going to see a lot of injuries with. You can kind of see here how the teeth are actually, they are bones. They're up in your skull. So that is why it is not very fun to have teeth pulled or to have teeth injured. It hurts. For your spinal cord, after it leaves your brain, we know it goes all the way down to the end, and then smaller nerves branch out. It's about 45 centimeters long in total. Of course, that depends on how tall you are. And the spinal cord is actually organized into tracts, so you can see there the cervical nerves are in blue, and that's where they send messages to, down your arms. The thoracic ones are green, the lumbar are purple, and then the sacral ones are the orangish. So, for example, if you go to a chiropractor and you say, my arm is hurting, they know it's might be coming from a cervical nerve, so they know what to adjust. So they're called tracts or clusters. It's basically the area where the spinal cord is attached to. The cervical spine, you can see it a little better there. There are 7 of them. It curves a little bit. That weird little bone underneath your jaw, that's the hyoid. It's not attached to anything. We number them C1 through C7. C1's on top, C7 is down by the shoulders. In the neck, we also have ligaments, just like we have everywhere else. The vertebrae are held together by ligaments. The anterior parts are held together by the discs. So you can sprain, strain, tear the ligaments we'll get to that part later. Your neck is pretty movable. You can do flexion, extension, lateral rotation, where you're doing like the no motion, and lateral flexion, where you put your ear to your shoulder. Also in the neck, these things will be important because if you get injured in the neck, yeah, you might have injured your spinal cord, but you might also have injured one of these things. You've got your pharynx, your larynx, your trachea, your esophagus, your thyroid. We've seen all of these before. I'm just reminding you that they're in the neck. Last part, and probably one of the most important parts, the blood supply to your head. In your neck, you have 2 groups of you have a group of arteries and a group of veins. 2 groups of vessels. So the arteries, the ones coming from the heart up toward the brain, are called carotid arteries. You have 2, one on the right and one on the left. They come directly from your aorta, so it's heart, aorta, carotid. They have a really tight connection to the heart, and that's how blood gets up to your brain. So if you had some kind of injury to your neck that affected your blood, you would be in trouble really fast. This is also why if you have any sort of injury to the neck or a cut or anything that causes blood to come out, if you cut the carotid arteries, it squirts out because it's so close to the heart. Going the other way from the brain back down, those are the jugular veins. You have 3, so interior, exterior, anterior. And they connect directly to the vena cava, which then goes to the heart. So these arteries and veins are pretty much directly to the heart. If you watch a lot of Animal Planet, you hear about them the predators going for the jugular vein. It doesn't take very long for you to die if you cut any of these. So you do need to know carotid and jugular, and that they are really important. Not only to keeping your brain alive, but if you damage them or cut them, you can die really fast. And that's all we have for today. So make sure you have finished these before we get to our next class. See you later.